to the Whiskey Row History Show. I'm Constable Ron Williams, the Yavapai County Constable for Prescott Precinct. With me is historian Bradley G. Courtney, known as Brad to me. And today we're talking about Virgil Earp in Prescott. Virgil, as we've tried to be telling the whole world, Virgil is the toughest of the Earps. Most of Virgil's glory has been usurped by Wyatt, but we are strong Virgil protagonists.
And for those of you who have seen that recent Netflix documentary, we're not real fond of it. It's entertaining, but we believe in the premise that Virgil was controlling things in Tombstone.
Yes.
And he was the real alpha. I mean, nothing against Wyatt Earp, but just so you know, we're very pro Virgil. And part of the reason is that he lived in Prescott, and Prescott was his and Allie's favorite town.
As per her words, that was their favorite place.
And him too. He said it's the only place that felt like home to us.
Exactly. So Virgil Earp and Prescott. So Virgil and Allie, they come to Arizona Territory in July of 1877. Now, Brad, did they come? They came here by themselves on a wagon, or were they with the whole family?
They must have came with. This is a recent discovery for us, anyway. So we know that Newton Earp, the half brother, was here first, and he's the guy that settled at the sawmill, and we think he squatted. And you can talk about that part, but Newton was here first. And you can talk about where Virgil was before that. But yeah, we think he actually rode in with, Virgil came later, which you'll talk about. But his father, Nicholas Earp, actually showed up. You know, he was there in town. So that's opened up a whole new area of research for us, because he stayed at the sawmill. And we believe that Virgil lived on a sawmill. So we're trying to piece that all together. But yeah. Newton, Nicholas, and probably Virgil, but Virgil and Allie came a little bit later.
So they came on what was the Beale Road. The Beale Road was not much of a road, is more of a trail that led from Santa Fe all the way through Santa Fe, all the way basically following what's now I-40 through what's now Kingman, and then across the river, and it went on to San Bernardino. I believe it was originally scouted out by a gentleman named Beale in the 1850s, I believe, 1858, if memory serves right. I could be wrong.
Right, yeah.
And it was not heavily used, but it was used to get to California. And so they came along the Beale Road from Santa Fe, New Mexico, till they got to what was called then Sunset Crossing, and today is now known as Winslow, Arizona. At Sunset Crossing, they headed southwest, kind of initially what's Highway 87 now, but then it veered further west, and the Chavez Trail went to basically what's now Stoneman Lake along I-17, and then they traveled south to Camp Verde.
Right.
And they would have gotten to Camp Verde somewhere, local legend says 4th of July, but somewhere very early July, they got to Camp Verde. And Camp Verde then was a very small community. It was basically a fort and a small community. They had a post office, and it was the only post office in the Verde Valley, which becomes important in how we determined what Virgil was doing.
Right.
So they get there, and if you some of the earlier works that were done and interviews with Allie from the 40s, they came to a cabin, and they met a man named Benjamin Baker. And also a Mr. Jackson, which we'll talk about Mr. Jackson in a little bit, because he's kind of a mystery and a half.
That's why we call him Mr.
Yeah, that's why we call him Mr. Jackson, because he's kind of a half mystery. We have an idea who he might be or who he might be related to.
There were several Jacksons. There was even a Jesse Jackson in Prescott at the time, but not the same one.
It wasn't the same one?
Not the fellow we know.
Okay. So they come to Camp Verde, and they meet up with Mr. Ben Baker, and we know through Donald Chaput and several other authors that they start working a mail wagon. Virgil starts working a mail wagon for Ben Baker, and it's 2 days out of Prescott. And so twice a week, he does a 2-day drive to Prescott and back.
I'll interject here
Yeah.
because that's actually a correction you've made, because in the biography on Virgil Earp is pretty much it's Don Chappett's book, and he wrote that he was one of the early Earp biographers as far as getting it right. So he kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Put the trail to it or whatever. But he actually thought maybe that Virgil was shipping mail from Miller Valley. And we
Correct.
all went, boy, that's awful close.
That's awful 2 days for Miller Valley. I know the roads were bad, but
Yeah.
they weren't worth. I mean, you could walk it.
So Constable has determined that it's Camp Verde. So go ahead.
No, and exactly, and even Reedhead, she believed it was Chino Valley, possibly.
Right.
But we do know that Ben Baker did have a stage line. He had the actual mail contract to go from capital to capital, from Prescott, Arizona to Santa Fe, New Mexico. So he had the contract. He ran the mail. He also had the stage line that went from one to the other. And he actually advertised in the Journal Minor of 1875 that he went from Camp Verde to Prescott twice a week.
Yeah.
And you could do it for $7 back then.
You didn't want to, Miller Valley he'd have to be going really slow
Yes.
if it was from Miller, even Chino.
So we know for a fact that Allie said that, and then through Chaput and Reedhead and other people that Virgil did a 2-day drive to Prescott twice a week. And now we also know that the Star Line, it was later called the Star Line mail route, the stage route, it actually did go twice a week to Prescott from Chino Valley, or for Camp Verde, where Ben Baker actually lived. And that's where the mail post office was for that region. It was the only post office in the Verde Valley. So it all kind of, we can't say for 100% fact, but all the information conglomerates to the point that they lived in, Virgil and Allie lived in or around Ben Baker in Camp Verde, and Virgil did the mail route twice a week to Prescott. 2-day drive up Copper Canyon, across what's now 169 essentially, and then up 69 essentially to Prescott. He'd stay there, he'd pick up mail, he'd pick up passengers, and he'd take them back to Camp Verde, where the next leg of the stage would take them up towards Sunset Crossing, and then later to all the way to Santa Fe.
And we've driven that route. People don't know it, but we've driven that route all the time.
Yes.
Pretty much the basic route.
The basic route.
Yeah, we just drove it recently, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, it's a lot easier now.
Yeah.
It doesn't take 2 days. So the other person that Reedhead and Waters talk about is the Mr. Jackson. Supposedly there was a Mr. Jackson living there with Ben Baker, who had a pregnant wife that Allie helped midwife for. The problem is that there's no record at all in any of the newspapers or any documents we can find that Mr. Jackson ever existed and was part of that company. Baker did have a partner in Santa Fe who ran the other half of the operation, but it wasn't Jackson. However, Jackson and Tompkins Saloon, which will come into play later this talk, Jackson and Tompkins Saloon did play a part in the stage line, because that's where you buy. If you were in Prescott and you wanted to go to Santa Fe, you bought a ticket or you dropped off your mail at Jackson and Tompkins Billiards Hall and Saloon on Whiskey Row.
Right.
And there is where you picked up your stage to go to Camp Verde.
And for listeners, I'll go ahead and give you a frame of reference for that. Nowadays, it's where it's on the row, 134 Montezuma Street. It's now Arts Prescott Gallery. So
four doors down from the palace.
Just down from the palace. Yeah, and like you say, it was Jackson and Tompkins. They were one of the top 4 saloons back in that day, and maybe this is why Jackson got in there. But Jackson was very much a part of that, and I forget the name of the Jackson and Tompkins. What his first name was. There was a Jackson and a Cal. There was a bunch of Jacksons.
There was a Cal Jackson.
Jackson 5, I think.
Yeah, there was a Cal Jackson who I believe may have been Jackson Tompkins, but I'm not 100% sure. And I still haven't been able to figure out if he had a wife and 5 kids, and one born in 77. But that hopefully that'll develop eventually. Right. So anyway, so here's Virgil. He's leaving, twice a week. He leaves Camp Verde and he takes the trail up to Prescott. picks up mail, picks up passengers, and takes them back. Takes them back to Camp Verde, where they either stay there or they get on the next stage to go north towards Sunset Crossing. And him and Allie are there for a matter of months, probably. We don't know exactly how long.
We'll tell you this. It's kind of a recent discovery. A researcher named Dennis McGowan, I hope I'm saying, he's a fantastic researcher, sent me a clip from the Miner, which was the Arizona Miner, which was the main newspaper in Prescott. And the very first mention of Virgil in the Prescott newspaper was, I think it was August 22nd. So what it said there was Virgil Earp is in from the Pine Woods. That's how they described it, which gives credence to he lived maybe out to the Thumb Butte region. Recent research, he may have been down south of Prescott on the what's now White Spar, but he was out in the woods somewhere. So he had made his way into the Prescott area by August. This was August 22nd, the report, so sometime before that. And I think it's important for listeners to realize also Virgil was not well known. He wasn't a legend yet. Neither was Wyatt Earp. Neither was Doc Holliday when they came through.
They're just guys.
Yeah, they were just guys. So when Virgil Earp came into town, it was just another guy.
Guy coming in.
And he was going to make a name for himself in Prescott, which we'll get to. But yeah, I just thought I'd interject.
No, I know. Yeah. No, exactly. And, Virgil didn't own property in Camp Verde, and I'll be realistic, until 1900 or 1895, he didn't own any property in Yavapai County.
Yeah, we know
so
of, yeah.
that we know. I mean, I've checked the county
Right.
records for the era, and he's not listed in there.
Nothing showing up.
So whether he rented property, whether he squatted out on property, we don't know. But he didn't own anything.
It's always been said it was an abandoned sawmill.
And we'll get there.
Yeah.
We'll get there. But so he's again, July, through July and at least part of August, he's running the mail route. And at some point, him and Allie move to Prescott.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we don't know where they're living. We have no idea exact moment where they're living. But somewhere between July and August, or August and October, he moves to Prescott. And let me put my glasses on because I can see or read, but I cannot do both at the same time. And I want to make sure I get this right. So in 1877, Virgil and Allie arrive in Prescott. And in 1877, the population of the entire town is less than 1,800 people, and it might be 1,500 people.
Yeah.
It's a very small town. The town essentially is the plaza and one block in every direction. I mean, it's if you go 2 blocks out of the plaza, you're out of town.
You're East Prescott or West Prescott?
Yeah. The entire county had less than 5,000 people. I mean, and I don't know how many much less, but the 1880 census showed 5,000. So there was less than 5,000 people here.
In this giant county.
The entire county was bigger than it is now because it included a lot of other counties that got formed out of it. And the entire territory, all of Arizona territory, only had less than 40,000 residents, and it's possible as few as 25,000, which is what, that's, less than Prescott now. So you figure the entire territory has less than the population of Prescott.
Right. And the greater population was down in Tucson, and it was going to grow.
Yes.
And we'll get to that part.
Yes.
It was going to grow exponentially.
So Prescott was a very small town. But it was the capital. It was the territorial capital. It was the capital of the county.
Right.
And it was the largest town in northern Arizona.
In 1877, the capital actually, it had gone to Tucson. 1877 is when the capital came back to Prescott. So things were happening in Prescott.
It was being revitalized because the capital was here, and then you have to have the infrastructure to support the capital.
And Prescott's almost in the middle of Arizona. But all that activity was, here.
Yeah.
Prescott.
So now we get to the fun stuff.
Yeah, baby.
Like I said, somewhere, August, there's a report that he's coming in from the Pines. I will tell you, on the Chavez Trail, just north of Camp Verde, there's a marker called Pine. So I don't know if when he says Virgil's in from the Pines, it means he's in from just out of town, or if he's from. I mean, what does that mean?
Yeah, what does that mean?
Yeah, thank you, reporter, for being as vague as possible.
I took it as he was out in the woods,
Yeah.
in the Ponderosa somewhere.
And that's a valid take.
Yeah.
But by October, at least, we know for a fact Virgil is living in Prescott.
And he must have made some buddies because he was hanging out in Prescott.
Yeah.
But let's do the shootout.
Let's do the shootout on Whiskey Row.
Yeah, this is what made, matter of fact, the Constable and I wrote a couple of articles for True West Magazine a few years ago, which was really cool. Bob Bosbell did a whole painting, and it was awesome. But this was October, and Virgil was in town, maybe from the Pine Woods or whatever. But we'll get to Virgil in a minute. Let's start with what happened to get Virgil to be part of this posse, which we believe was the beginning of Virgil's
law enforcement
career as a lawman, because it led to other things. He didn't hold a badge at the time. Chaput doesn't think, and historians do not believe, he held office in Dodge City of any kind.
Now, Alley claimed he did.
Right.
But whether he just worked for a couple of weekends for his brother as kind of an unpaid special deputy, or maybe he made a couple dollars as a special deputy, he was never officially on the books.
And he was there.
But he was there.
But there's no, like you say, no record.
So
go ahead.
October 16, 1877. It's a Tuesday. Tuesday afternoon.
Tuesday. Taco Tuesday no, I guess they didn't have that back then. Maybe they did. Tequila
Tuesday.
Tequila Tuesday. That's what, I think that was the preference back then. But back to the Jackson and Tompkins Saloon. So in Prescott at the time was a man, a rather impressive man named William McCall. He was a colonel. He was actually brevetted general during the Civil War. He was from Pennsylvania, fought in the Battle of Gettysburg. But as listeners might know, we needed more generals during the Civil War, so that's what a brevet is. It was a temporary thing. So when peacetime, he was demoted, as it were, but kept in the Army. Some of them were just go away. But he was a colonel at the time, and I actually found out later that he must have come through Texas, as you will see, and he knew some things. But he was actually a courier at Fort Whipple at the time. So Colonel McCall is in the Jackson and Tompkins Saloon
on Whiskey Row.
Where Arts Prescott Gallery is, just down from where the palace is now, right smack dab in the middle. It was one of the main saloons. He was playing a game of billiards, and these guys walked in. One was going by the name of Mr. Vaughn, and we don't have a first name for him. But
I don't think he had a first name for him either.
Yeah, it's an alias. And there was another guy named, he was going by John Tallis, and his real name was Robert Tullis. So that took a lot of thinking to get there.
Well, you got to keep it simple,
Yeah,
otherwise you forget. Otherwise you forget.
You might forget. But these guys see McCall playing billiards, and it must have been, Mr. Vaughn was really George Wilson, not of Dennis the Menace fame. When I heard that, Mr. Wilson. But his real name was George Wilson. And they saw McCall, and Wilson must have believed that McCall knew something about Wilson, because Wilson had killed a deputy sheriff, Montague County, Texas. It was bizarre that he was being taken in for some minor charge, and he ends up getting a gun. And he shoots. His name was Robert Broadus. Murdered him. And he's holding these other guys at gunpoint. And there was this whole weird thing about Wilson actually offered $20 to the other guys to buy a horse from him. They said no, and they gave him. It's really crazy.
So hold on. He kills the deputy, and offers the rest of the posse $20 for a horse.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, that honestly, as this story progresses, it's right in line with
You'll
Wilson.
see how Wilson and Vaughn are not.
They're not the sharpest tools.
Yeah, not the sharpest tools.
Yeah, they're like a club and a Anyway, so now I could be wrong, but I was under the impression, and I think I'm probably wrong on this one. I was under the impression that McCall may have been on that posse
that Chase brought us, and that was, I'll be honest, that was my conclusion but I'm not sure about that now.
But it would draw a line why they
Yeah.
recognize each other.
Yeah. The only thing that stumps me a little bit is that McCall did not know Wilson's real name.
Yes.
He's calling him Mr. Vaughn.
Yeah.
Because that's what he was going by in town there. And so anyway, they come in and they surround McCall, Wilson and Tullis, and they start whispering stuff in his ear.
Sweet nothings.
They're building. I don't think so. But it was basically keep your mouth shut or else. That's what it had to be.
And I believe the newspaper actually said that Wilson, Vaughn, confronted McCall while Toulos, John Doe, stood behind playing with his gun.
It could be.
Meaning that basically he was just being intimidating.
Right. But McCall felt threatened, so he goes over to the Justice of Peace. His name was C.F. Cate.
So if I can interject where he had to go. So the Justice of the Peace is not where it is now. The courthouse in the center of the plaza didn't exist.
Right.
So the courthouse was a vacant field. It was fenced off with white picket fence. They let cows run in there. And so the actual courthouse and county building was on the east side of 100 North Cortez Street,
Right.
which is now, the building is now a big Masonic lodge. It's now, there's a watch store. There's a couple businesses in there, but it's the old Masonic
right
lodge.
on that corner.
Right on that corner, the second building from the corner.
I've always wondered where that was.
And that is where the courthouse was and the county building. The county building, so I can just, we'll go in a second, but I want to just some color on the county building. The county building was a two-story log structure, two-story log building. It had wood board facing. The first floor had the office for the sheriff, the office for the county attorney, 3 wooden cells, which are basically like, just holes, essentially. And the top floor was the courtroom. And the entire top floor was the courtroom with a balcony. On Friday nights and Saturday nights, it was a dance hall and social hall. And on Sunday mornings, it was church.
Popular place.
Very popular place. It was, and that was the county building. That was it. And so anyway, yes.
That's where Cate would have been, in other words. He was the Justice of Peace.
Yeah, C.F. Cate would have sat in the courtroom there.
Right.
And so McCall rushes across the plaza.
He gets out of that situation somehow. He backs us away. So he has to, that's, I always wonder where that would have been. So he went across the plaza and went to C.F. Cate, told Cate, who was in town, that this guy, Vaughn, killed a deputy sheriff in Montague County, Texas. Told us, I don't know. He was just
but he gets named in the murder warrant also.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, maybe they just kind of,
as far as I could tell,
they flew loose with the facts, maybe.
Yeah, he was just hanging out with Wilson, but not a
but they're both named in a warrant.
Nice fellow. So they fill out a warrant for Mr. Vaughn
and John Doe.
And John Doe, they called him. They weren't calling him Tallis at that time. So then the warrant's given to the constable, Frank Murray. So Frank Murray and McCall accompanies them over there, go back to
Jackson and
Tompkins Saloon. And while that was happening, these guys are drinking. And you got to look real close in the report, but there was a third guy. And I don't think he had much to do with anything, except these guys went out while McCall was getting the warrant. They went out and
on the street.
This always is funny to me. They went out in front of the Jackson and Tompkins Saloon, and guess what was happening on the plaza? A dog was being walked. Can you imagine that? A dog on the plaza being walked?
That sounds far-fetched to me. I don't believe that at all.
I call it the dog walking capital of the world.
It is.
Lady walking by with a dog, and these guys are bad dudes. They start shooting at the dog.
And quite frankly, they're almost shooting at the lady.
Yeah, I mean, they're drunk.
Yeah.
I mean, they're intoxicated. So you got to look real close. And I thought I was seeing things for a while. But you look real close, there was a third guy shooting the dog. So when McCall and Murray get back with the warrant, they think they're going to get, they're being arrested for shooting at the dog. I think they tell the guy, if you don't want to be part of this, the third guy, you better get out of here. So he disappears from the whole situation. And they go, no, you're under arrest for the murder of Robert Broadus in Texas.
Yeah, so the constable tells Wilson and Toulos, hey, I have a warrant for your arrest. Drop your guns. You're under arrest.
Forget about the dog. This is more serious. So these guys, they back out. This is Wilson and Tallis. No, I'm saying it wrong now myself. Robert
Toulos.
Wilson and Tullis, whatever, however
Tullis,
you pronounce
Toulos.
it. Yeah, they back out. They get on their horses
At gunpoint. They hold the constable at gunpoint.
They're backing out with their pistols pulled. They get on the horses. They got their pistols out. They start going south toward Goodwin Street. And later on, it reminds you of an old West, Wild West movie scene. They're shooting guns to the left and the right, bam, bam, making a lot of noise,
Yeah, like a bad B Western. They are riding south out of town on that dirt road of Whiskey Row, and they're shooting to the left and shooting to the right and hooping and hollering.
Yeah.
And they just, it's like a bad movie.
So what they must have done is taken, all right, but Murray figures out, these guys are dangerous. We need help. And this is where Virgil goes in. And the newspaper report said somewhere in friendly conversation was Ed Bowers, the Yavapai County Sheriff, Wiley Standifer, the United States Marshal, and this unknown guy named Virgil Earp. And Ron and I went back and forth on this because there wasn't much to Prescott, but my thought was earlier on, and we've come to a different conclusion, my thought was they didn't hear the gunshots, so they must have been farther away. That didn't make sense because Prescott's so...
Yeah, and that's the problem is with that story is that yes, they're all together. And by the way, if you failed to mention, Virgil is so new to Prescott that the newspaper called him Mr. Erb.
Mr. Erb.
E-R-B. No, not even an A. E-R-B.
I think there was an A in there.
Was there an A?
Yeah, but it could be.
Yeah.
But
so that's the conundrum. The conundrum is they're not close enough to hear the gunfire or intercede, but so they're far enough away not to hear it or intercede, but they're close enough that they're found.
Yeah.
And the town's not that big.
So what happened? Yeah, we went back and forth on this, and I go, what? If these are lawmen, they heard gunshot, they would have run to the sound.
Yes.
Well, that September,
just weeks earlier,
literally weeks earlier, Wiley Standifer and a guy named Gilman Shaw open up a place on Gurley Street called the Palace Saloon. Called the Palace Saloon.
But not our palace.
But it's not our palace. But people know in Prescott that it's always said that the palace was established in 1877. That's because, sure enough, in the newspaper, it said that Gilman and Shaw opened up the palace on September, blah, 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 1877. And that's been concluded by historians much too quickly that was related to today's palace. Real quick on that, it wasn't. This was on Gurley Street, and it lasted for about a year. And there was one more palace on Montezuma Street. Palace was a common name for a saloon. Another one owned by a lady, Mrs. McManus. She had a palace on the road, but this palace is not related to.
And this palace, the palace we're talking about right now, that the U.S. Marshal co-owned, was roughly where Frozen Fanny's is now. Roughly,
if you remember, I have it at 112. Some reports at 112. So that's where that Capitol. What was it? Arizona Shoebox used to be.
The
there.
Arizona Shoebox.
Yeah.
Okay,
and now you can't.
112 East Gurley Street.
So I think it was a little west of Franny's, but that's because I saw the 112.
Yes. Okay. But it's right
Gurley
there,
Street.
right there on the plaza on Gurley Street. And Wiley Standifer is co-owner with the other gentleman's name was, I'm sorry?
Gilman Shaw.
Mr. Shaw.
Right.
They're still in their grand opening phase of this saloon.
And Wiley Standifer is a U.S. Marshal. So our conclusion is that Murray knew that Standifer would be at his saloon.
At his brand new saloon.
So we think he goes in there. He tells Standifer, I need your help. But also there was Ed Bowers, the Yavapai County Sheriff, and Virgil. And I just kind of see Virgil was not he wasn't a Sam Elliott type. He was more, I think, a Burt Reynolds, but they say he had a deep,
booming
voice. And he'd light up a room.
And he was very gregarious. Everybody seemed to love him. He was very social. He was a social guy. And so, and that would make sense if they're in the saloon, especially if they're near the back where the owners tend to hang out.
They would not have heard
and it's loud in there and it's crowded because it's still grand opening. They wouldn't necessarily have heard the shooting outside. And that would explain
why they didn't hear
they didn't hear it.
Yeah. And it's funny because I always had the palace in my mind. But then I went, wait a minute. Standifer would have been in the timeline matches up perfect.
Exactly.
It was maybe open a month.
Yeah.
That. So Virgil was there. I think Virgil had a shotgun with him, but you can't say because one report says he ran back home. But if he lives where we think he did, he would not have had time. So Murray forms this posse. Colonel McCall's going to be part of this posse.
So we have the constable, the U.S. Marshal, the sheriff, McCall, who's the witness, and Virgil Earp.
Right. And so Bowers and was it Standifer? No, Bowers and Murray are going to ride horse. They have horses.
Possibly at the Plaza Stables, which is really the only major stables in town.
Could have been, or they had, could have been there. But Standifer and McCall, they have a buggy. Now, whether they parked it on the street there and had it available right there,
or if it was at the stables again,
it could have been down the stables on.
So either everything was hitched and ready to go, or they were stabled and unhitched, unsaddled. So we don't know how long this took.
And there were other stables there too.
Yeah.
The Plaza, it gets the
glory,
gets all the attention because it was the major. But there were other. But whether they were right there, we don't know. But Virgil doesn't have a horse.
No.
So he must have walked into town, but he has a shotgun.
Winchester, you mean?
Winchester. Was that a rifle?
It was a rifle.
It was a rifle. So they deputize Virgil on the spot, but Virgil's going to have to keep up on foot.
Yay.
He doesn't have a horse. So they take off. How much time that took, we don't know, but it had to take some time.
It took some time because, like you said, if the carriage was already hitched, and if the horses are already saddled and everybody's parked out front, it still took some time.
30 minutes
But realistically,
yeah.
there's a good chance that the horses weren't hitched and they weren't saddled.
I'm always thinking, for some reason, I have an hour. I don't know if I saw that somewhere, but
it took time.
But it took time. So we're thinking Wilson and Tullis are down, and I live down White Spire. I'm thinking they're way down by my place.
They're halfway to Wilhoit at this point.
And here's Virgil. If you've seen pictures of him, he doesn't look like
he doesn't have the runner's physique.
He's not an Ethiopian type run, not a marathoner. He doesn't have a runner's physique.
No,
but he's got to keep up on foot.
Yeah.
And luckily, here's what happened. So there must have been some eyewitnesses that saw these guys on horseback taking a right and then a left. So they take off, and here in the front is McCall and Standifer on that carriage, 2-person carriage. Here come the guys on their horses.
And then Virgil and his Winchester.
And Virgil was right behind, keeping up, So what happened was very fortuitous for Virgil. Right about where the Mile High Middle School is, Carlton and Goodwin was a major Prescottonian earlier pioneer. His name was Alfred Noyes. Could be Albert. I can't forget it was Alfred. But his last name was Noyes. He was a lumberman. He also adjusted the piece. But I found out where his house was because in the Charlotte Hall archives, now it's called the Research Center, is a map drawn by a old pioneer up in the pioneer's home. It's on the manila paper about this size, and it's done in pencil. And you could tell he was using a ruler and everything like that. But it's very up, so even though it's over 100 years old. And it shows Noyes' house is right there where the Mile High Middle School is now. And the report says that's somewhere in that area is where these guys...
In the vicinity of Noyes' house. These
guys, Wilson and Tullis, they dismount.
So they ride out of town, shooting and hollering, holding the constable at gunpoint. They get what?
They stop
3/4 of a mile,
if that.
They're remember the town only extended 1 block, so they're maybe a half mile out of town in the woods. There's some houses out there, and they stop by the creek. They stop
by the creek to light up a cigarette.
They dismount. They light up cigarettes, and they're probably laughing about how smart they are.
Yeah, right. We'll see how smart they are in a minute. So McCall and Standifer ride right by him. One of them, drunken fools, one of them says, "Don't run over us, you son of a beep." And the other guy must have been, you idiot. Well, shut up.
Yeah,
There.
and meanwhile,
We had a baby.
McCall is like, what?
Yeah. Then he realizes it's them. They stop. They dismount. Here comes Bauer and Murray on the horses. They dismount. They're in the middle are these two outlaws. Here comes Virgil in between.
They got him in a crossfire.
So Wilson, poor guy, brilliant guy. They tell him to
Throw up your hands.
Throw up your hands, surrender and all that, but they don't. And Wilson goes, Lord, he shouts out a prayer.
The bad guy, Wilson.
It's called an entreaty in the paper. The bad guy, Wilson, yells out, Lord, have mercy on me. Poor, drunken, and worthless son of a B word. He liked that B word. And they open fire. And Wilson is hit in the head, probably by a pistol shot.
Actually, no. The newspaper said that Wilson's head was taken off by Virgil's Winchester.
That's okay.
That's what they claim.
I missed that.
Yeah, that's what the paper claims.
Tullus was hit. I know Tullus was hit by the rifle fire.
Yes,
he's hit like 8 times.
8 times he's shot.
He's dead
right there.
And Wilson drops
with the cigarette still in his mouth.
They say that's what Allie said. Now, that's the whole thing. Allie,
it wasn't there,
but she writes it. She tells it like she was, or whoever was writing for her made it sound like she was right there.
Yeah.
It was by the house. And
yeah,
he made one was Virgil was running around. They ran up and begged Virgil to take part.
Yeah, that was Waters.
I'll help you. I'm Virgil Earp.
Yeah,
but Virgil takes out Tullus, and Tullus dies right away. And I have to look back at that at the what's it called, coroner's inquest, autopsy or whatever, to see who hit.
So Wilson doesn't die right away, though.
He doesn't die right away.
He's missing the top of his head, but he lives for 2 more days.
Yeah,
never regains consciousness.
Got a bullet in his head, and people, the reporters of the miners, started thinking back, going, "Remember that prayer, Lord have mercy on me?" They're going. He started getting real theological.
Is he going to live?
Just the sincerity of his prayer. He was a bad guy, but aren't we all? As soon as that report came out, he died. And Virgil, even though it was Virgil Earp, I think you are right, it's ERB that they had it. They didn't have his name right, but his stock rises big time. And he was the guy that kind of dominated the report. He was the guy that really did he did good service.
Yes.
So he shot and Virgil was a Civil War veteran, so he'd seen combat, and he probably had killed people. And I'll let you take it on after that, because after that, Virgil, his career skyrockets.
It starts to take off. So interesting fact, though. So Virgil's shootout in Prescott happens on October 16th. A day or 2 later, Frank Stillwell has a shooting. He kills the cook of a chuck wagon just north of Prescott at a ranch. And I haven't found the actual records yet, the actual coroner's inquest yet. But I'm really curious if both Virgil and Frank Stillwell were essentially sitting next to each other in court, waiting to hear the coroner's inquest.
And for those, Frank Stillwell is the big part of the Cowboys down in Tombstone later. He might have been the one that shot Virgil himself.
He was believed to be the one who killed Morgan.
Yeah.
And he was the one who was killed by Wyatt and Doc at the train station in Tucson.
Worst shot up man I ever saw.
I know.
Yep.
So that's just one of those possibilities. And
I'll
go ahead.
One thing right here. So Frank Stillwell's in town. So that connection is amazing. But also in town was Frank Stillwell's brother, Jack, who was an impressive person.
He was a good guy.
Yeah. And he was very accomplished. And there's a book out about just him. But he's the guy who identified Tullus, which is interesting.
So that brings us. So Virgil's now got some notoriety in town. He's been mentioned in the papers, and in spring of 1878, maybe 5 months later, 6 months later, he's driving a freight wagon from Prescott every day up to Gillette and Tip Top. He's working for. I had this written down so I don't get it wrong. It's Patterson, Caldwell, and Levally or Levely. I'm not sure how you want to pronounce that. Freight company, and they have the stage route, the mail route, and freight transport from Prescott up to the mines and the Bradshaws, and they go on to Phoenix also. So it's Prescott, Tip Top, Gillette, Phoenix, and back. And Virgil is one of the drivers. And Virgil gets a lot of newspaper talk because he's always passing on news of what's going on in Tip Top, what's going on in Gillette. So he's kind of the newspaper's go-to man on the street always for these
talkative
events.
one. He's very social.
Very social. We talked about that. So he's big in that. So he's quoted in March of 78. He's quoted in April of 78. Also in April of 78, and this comes in the doc eventually. One of his passengers going up to Gillette to check out the mines is Gosper. John Gosper. Gosper ends up he is the Secretary of State for the territory of Arizona. And in 2 years, he will be renting a room next to Doc Holliday in a boarding house.
Amazing, huh?
So it's very possible that Virgil's meeting of Gosper and becoming a friend of Gosper led to him and Doc
could have been
living together.
Or maybe he was a reference.
He may have been a reference for him.
He's a dentist, and that's it.
He's an upstanding guy. Yeah. He's a dentist, and he's college educated, and he's also an alcoholic, and he shoots people. But that's very interesting in the fact that you start to see, even in Prescott in 1878, you start to see these Tombstone alliances starting to happen, and antagonism starting to happen. So anyway, by October of 78, the PCNL freight line disbands, and everybody flees absconding with money, owing money.
Patterson left the company earlier. Let me throw this in because this is too good. This is what I wanted to tell you. So Patterson, Caldwell, I'm going to say Levelly because that's in my head is what it is, but they have this stage that goes back and forth with Gillette. Patterson leaves. By the way, George Wilson, the guy that Virgil probably shot, worked for Patterson in another avenue of some sort. But so now Levelly and Caldwell have the stage company, but they get into trouble financially, go into debt. They leave.
They flee.
They get out of town. They're going to New Mexico. And here's the best part. I always joke that I go, thank you, God, for this story. But then I realized someone got killed in the whole thing. But Levelly and Caldwell are heading toward New Mexico. Mrs. Levelly goes on to some town. I can't remember what town it is. And then they discover that Caldwell's missing. So what happened was Caldwell and Mrs. Levelly were having a little fling. And Mr. Levelly didn't like that so much, so shot him. So that's another great story. That's how I remember. I read a whole article. That's how they end it. But yeah, Levelly ends up shooting Caldwell because of Mrs. Levelly, and then I don't know what happened.
So the whole PCNL company just fell apart.
It went to hell.
It went to hell in a handbasket. So Virgil is doing all this stuff. While he's doing this, like I said, the freight company disbands. While Virgil is working for that freight company, he actually petitions to be appointed night watchman for Prescott. Now, night watchman was it's a strange position. It's not quite law enforcement, and it's not quite a security guard. Essentially, he would be hired as night watchman to keep an eye on the town, make sure that fires don't start, and if they do, to alert everybody, and also to keep an eye out for thefts. So I know a previous night watchman, I believe his name was Kavanaugh, but I don't have
William Jennings was a night watchman. And they end up, because it's Whiskey Row,
Vanderbilt. Gentleman named Vanderbilt was the previous night watchman. He was actually he was deputized as a part-time deputy town marshal so that he had police powers at night. And I think Virgil was too, only because Virgil is reported in the paper of 78 as arresting a man for shooting in the street as night watchman. So he obviously had some kind of arrest powers as night watchman. So he's in the paper as night watchman. Let me backtrack. I'm sorry, because I jumped a bit. He in March, he applied to be night watchman, and he was denied. They hired somebody else. They hired Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt retires or quits, I should say. And Virgil is then appointed as night watchman. He's making $75 a month, which isn't bad pay back then. $75 a month to be night watchman. During that time as night watchman, he arrests a man for shooting his gun off in the streets. So Virgil he's proving himself.
It's an important position.
Then in October of 1878, Prescott has a shooting competition. Prescott and guns. I don't see how that fits together, but somehow it did.
Really?
So Prescott has a shooting competition, and Virgil Earp is one of the contestants. And Virgil makes 44 of 45 shots on this shooting contest. He is tied for first place with another gentleman, and he gets mentioned in the paper. So we have now a situation where Virgil, not only is he just gregarious and he's a popular guy for the newspapers to interview, but he was involved as a posse member in the Toulouse and Wilson shootout. He was the night watchman. He arrested some guy for shooting up the town. He makes 4 of 45 shots in his shooting competition and ties for first place. So a month later, in November of 1878, November 1st, Virgil puts an ad in the Weekly Miner, and he says he's announcing his candidacy for constable of Prescott. And at the time, every community had 2 constables. You had 2 JP, Justice of the Peace, and 2 constables. And so the constable, like today, the constable is charged with serving papers, processes, writs, and warrants for the justice court. Back then, they also had full police powers, full law enforcement powers, and essentially, in communities where the sheriff wasn't, it was too small to have a deputy there. The constable was the sheriff essentially. So it was a lower rung of law enforcement, but it was still an elected law enforcement position like it is today. So Virgil applies. He puts himself in there as he's running. Also running are the 2 current constables, Frank Murray, who we talked about, who was in the shootout at Whiskey Row, and Nathan Pierce. He was the first constable in Arizona. He was appointed in September of 1865 in Prescott. Pierce? Yeah. And Pierce was the constable for like 14 years. He's always been the constable. He was Prescott's like the stable of Prescott. Well, Virgil runs with both of them. Virgil gets more votes than either one of them.
Even Murray.
Yeah, even more than Murray.
Who probably deputized him.
Yeah. So he gets more than Murray. Murray gets the second amount of votes, and Nathan Pierce gets the third amount. So Nathan's out. Nathan Pierce is out. He goes to California for a while. So now Virgil is constable in Prescott. And I will just throw in, I'm very, very proud to have the exact same office that Virgil held in 1879.
Yeah, yes.
So Virgil gets elected November 6th, 1878. Now, and I'll be 100% honest, I don't know if they took office immediately or if they waited till January 1st. I don't know how it worked back then, and it's been unclear in my research. But definitely by January 1st of 1879, Virgil is constable. Relatively uneventful. The newspapers don't really say much about what he did. He's serving papers, he's doing asset seizures, maybe serving arrest warrants, but he doesn't make much news, except he is sued in court. As he was charged, he was given an order by the court to seize property from a guy who had unpaid debts. Virgil seized a wagon with like $300 worth of corn and a horse, a wagon, and a pile of corn, I guess. And the guy he took it from sued him, saying that he went beyond his mandate for the seizure. And apparently the district court agreed with them. And I guess Virgil had to give back the stuff that he seized and pay his $85 court costs.
He had a tendency to go overboard.
He did. He tended to really like, hey, this is the law and I'm going to do it. And it usually didn't work out for him, it seems like. But anyway, so he's constable. That's really the only thing that happens. The other thing that happens, he's in the paper for, is another misdeed. In October of 1879, the newspaper reports that a gentleman, Mr. Schultz, has come back from west of town. This is where the concept that Virgil had a sawmill west of town at Thumb Butte comes from. It says that Mr. Schultz came from west of town with bruises about his face and head, and saying that he was assaulted by Mr. Earp and Mr. Hansen with a gun and a stick.
Virgil could go overboard.
Yes. And if the paper was writing accurately and in consecutive order, it means Virgil beat him up with a gun and Mr. Hansen beat him up with a stick.
And it doesn't really say why, does it?
It doesn't say why. However, there's an idea about that, and we'll get there in a second.
Trespassing, maybe?
Kind of. And he came back into town, beat up, and he tells the paper he's going to swear out a arrest warrant for assault on those 2 men. Then the paper doesn't cover it anymore. But it does say 2 weeks later that Mr. Schultz has been prospecting west of town and found a nice big gold vein. So it's very possible that he trespassed on some land that was being operated on by Virgil and Hansen, and he refused to leave, and he got assaulted. So again, going back to Virgil and sawmills, the reason there was an idea about sawmills is Virgil did put in a bid for Fort Whipple for 500 cords of firewood to supply the fort. But the key thing is that it's cords of wood, which is just chopped wood for fire, and it's not lumber feet or board feet, which would be for building, which a sawmill would do.
Right.
So I don't think he had a sawmill realistically. I think he was just a guy making money by chopping wood, which people still do today.
Right.
I don't think he had a sawmill. There are several sawmills advertised in the 1870s in Prescott area, and Virgil's not associated with any of them, any that I can find. So he is sawing wood. He's cutting down trees and making firewood and selling it. And Mr. Schultz comes up and gets assaulted by Virgil and Hansen, and comes back. So we have this lawsuit pending, or these charges of assault pending. In the meantime, Wyatt and Doc and James and their women are coming from Las Vegas, New Mexico to Prescott.
So what happened was,
yes,
is all that time, or there's the big news in Arizona at that time was what was happening down in this new place they were calling Tombstone, silver mine. I mean, and people were leaving Prescott. The population was decreasing in Prescott, and there was some jealousy as to that. And Virgil saw that, and he goes, "Boy, I want to get out of that." So he wrote Wyatt. Wyatt leaves his job as whatever he was at, the deputy sheriff.
He was deputy. He was assistant marshal of Dodge City.
So he leaves his job, comes through Las Vegas where Doc Holliday and Kate were living, and tells them about that. And this is another episode, but I believe he told Doc that he was going to go through Prescott, and Doc goes, "Oh, Whiskey Row. That's where people, the gambling center of Arizona Territory." But they come through, and Doc stays. Wyatt, James, and that family, they go on down to Tombstone, and Doc stays. And Chapin, and I believe the same thing. I believe this is probably the first time that Doc and Virgil meet.
I think so.
Because the timeline doesn't line up. Doc wasn't in Dodge City very long.
Neither was Virgil.
Yeah, neither was Virgil. He, basically was.
Maybe a month or two. So one thing I do want to bring up on the whole idea of Virgil and Tombstone and Wyatt. So the movies very often show it's Wyatt's idea to come to Tombstone. However, if you look at Dodge City newspapers of the era, I've yet to see any reference to Tombstone, Arizona, or silver in southern Arizona in any Dodge City paper.
Probably was.
So Wyatt, the only way Wyatt would have known about it is if Virgil had wrote him. So that's why we both believe it was Virgil's idea that they come out this way to get in on the ground floor.
And then the second, when the Alley Earp thing was straightened out, I think it's called Tombstone Travesty,
yes,
something like that.
Yes,
it does say that Alley says that it was Virgil's idea.
Yes,
so
and that's Sue Reedhead.
That's Jane Coleman, Glenn Boyer's wife.
Okay,
it's another story.
So they come from Las Vegas with Doc and Big Nose Kate and their wives, and they come out to Prescott. Now there is zero in the newspaper about Wyatt Earp coming to Prescott. He was just a guy who came through town on a wagon. Same thing with James. Same thing with Doc. They're not mentioned. They're nobodies essentially to Prescott. And how long do they stay here? I mean, days, weeks, maybe a month?
November 14th said that Virgil's getting ready to leave.
Yes.
And it seems like Doc and Wyatt, they arrived right at the 1st of November. So a couple
of weeks.
And they must have left because they're in Tombstone, and they stopped in
December
Tombstone.
1st. They're in.
Yeah.
So Virgil, Wyatt and his brothers arrive, and Doc Holliday arrive in Prescott. Virgil goes and turns in. He resigns as constable. He resides as constable. While he's resigning as constable, the U.S. Marshal for that period is no longer Wiley Standifer. He's been replaced. Now the U.S. Marshal for Arizona Territory is Crawley Dake. And Crawley Dake deputizes Virgil as the deputy U.S. Marshal for the Tombstone District, because there's a lot of problems down there. He doesn't have a man down there. He knows Virgil apparently, and he trusts Virgil. So Virgil takes the commission And like you said, the newspaper says on the 14th that they are leaving Prescott or preparing to leave Prescott.
Right.
So within a day or two, I'm assuming they left.
And Wyatt might not even unpacked.
He might not have.
I'm sure he came into town and resupplied. He
You got arrested for a bit.
He was a saloon guy.
Yeah.
So surely we don't know what saloons because nothing's in the paper about Wyatt or Doc being in town.
He was just a guy.
So we make some inferences, where he would have gone. The Cabinet Saloon was the main place. Diana Saloon was another place. So I'm sure they went there.
Yeah. And the Cabinet became the Palace.
The Cabinet eventually became the Palace.
So our Palace we're talking about, the Palace that stands today. So Virgil gets his commission and turns in his badge. The family packs up and they actually have plans. They bring extra horses and their plans are to turn their travel wagons and these extra horses into a livery company. They're going to get rich hauling freight in and out of Tombstone, which that's something Virgil knows. He's been doing that.
Right.
He knows that very well.
Probably Wyatt had done some.
I'm sure Wyatt has done some. So that's what their plans are. So they pack up and they leave sometime after the 14th of November. And by the 27th of November, Virgil gets his commission changed. And if you look at the original document, it's crossed out for Prescott and it's written Pima County. I'm sorry, Yavapai crossed out and says Pima, and the date is put as November 27th.
Right.
And we know
also it says something about the state of it. They cross out and put territory.
Yeah. It says state of, and they cross out and territory of because they just they just manually changed the forms because there was no printing back then. And there was no PDFs back then to change. So Virgil gets that changed on November 27th. And according to the Spicer hearings of the OK Corral shootout, Wyatt says they arrived in Tombstone on December 1st. And there's no reason not to believe that because right at that period of time, Virgil actually registers to vote in Tombstone right around December 1st or 2nd or 3rd.
Right.
So that's a safe bet to believe. And that was Virgil's first foray into Prescott. He would come back, 20 years later. But that was his first foray. He spent, we're talking about basically all 77, 78, 79, about 3 years here in Prescott. And as we said when we first started, Allie said later in life that Prescott was her favorite place.
Right. And Virgil, there was a guy named James Dodson who deserves a whole show. But he one reason Prescott was peaceful at the time was this guy, James Dobson. He was a strong chief of police. What was it? Village marshal.
He was village marshal, town marshal.
Then he was later, I think they made that the chief of police or something like that. But he had control of the town. He tamed Whiskey Row. He grew, and he's an amazing guy. He grew up with Jesse James and Frank James. He was a Quantrill's raider. His great granddad was Daniel Boone.
We're doing an episode on him.
Yeah, I mean, this guy was amazing, and they became good friends. And Virgil actually, after when Virgil was healing after he got shot in California, he wrote Dodson, and he actually said, Prescott's the only place that felt like home to them. And Virgil also wrote that he was going to return to Tombstone.
That was like 1882. That was like 6 months after he had his arm partially blown off.
Even the newspaper goes, I don't think that's going to work.
But he had aspirations.
Yeah.
But no, they were here for about 3 years. Prescott made an impression on Virgil and Allie. They wanted to come back. They did come back. And quite frankly, Prescott's very proud that Virgil is part of our history, along with Doc.
I think I added up the years. It came to about 10 years that he
total.
Yeah.
So thank you for joining us on this podcast. If you like it, we hope you tune in again. If you don't like it, we hope you tune in again, and maybe we'll get better. But thank you for joining us again. It's Bradley G. Courtney, the Whiskey Row historian, author of 4 books.
Well, counting
the booklet, 4 books in a booklet.
Four and a half
books.
There's a half a booklet, which, by the way, is for sale at the Heritage Center and the Chamber of Commerce. But I want to put a plug in for your wife, Cassie, who designed the book design. And it's just beautiful. It's getting compliments from a lot of people, just the design, let alone the content.
So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.